computer all by myself. It was really hard. I turned it off and turned it back on again.
Yeah, you know, sometimes the old reboot just, it's like a good night's sleep, you know?
That's what I'm going to start calling it. My reboot, my good night's sleep.
Yep, yep.
Good morning.
Okay. Well, looks like we have all commissioners. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Washington County Board of Commissioners work session meeting for Tuesday, February 2nd. And happy February, everyone. It's good to see you in this bright, shiny new month. The first item on our agenda is board communications. Is there anyone who would like to go first in sharing of results, accomplishments, activities? Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
I just have one thing to share. Last week we being the PAB board reviewed we had the presentations from the applicants for the CDBG and homes dollars, and we reviewed all of those applications, had them all in by Sunday night. So that process is on its way. So but it took about, I think we were 5 hours of those presentations. There are lots of good things going on, but lots of resources required. So it's going to be a competitive process.
This was the second year, I think, that you all used Zoom grants to help manage that. How did it go for the second year?
Well, like anything that's a little bit complicated, you know, I got through it really, really well last year, and it took me just a few shots at it to get it straight this time. But that system works very well. But it also, one of the problems is that when you're coming down to the wire, a lot of people are on it, so it has its little glitches. But the staff does a great job in getting us putting all the information into Zoom grants so that we can effectively review the applications. So I find it really, really easy, but that's with the caveat that I was well supported.
About how much money were you folks trying to allocate this current year?
Can I get back to you and look at
certainly.
Okay. Let me
if I recall, will that be coming to us for final adoption in the coming weeks?
Yes, but we've still got a process to go through because we've just reviewing the applications. Then all the data has to be compiled. We have to have another meeting. So it'll be, I think it's going to be at least into March.
Yeah. I can't remember if, since 2020 was economically such a challenging year, I recall that the CARES Act provided some emergency funding as well. Did you end up having, or will you end up having more money to allocate this go around versus others because of that, or were those separate actions?
They're really very separate, and they're kept separate so that people like Jack Liang doesn't lose his mind.
A nice explanation. I like that. Cool, great. Well, thank you for representing us well on that, in that effort.
Absolutely.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Well, good morning. The only thing that I have to report is just a normal week of meetings, but last week we did have our meeting with Representative Marsh on the rural broadband. We included Aaron Doyle is our GR backup on that, and then Alex and I, and we had the representative, the executive director from Colpac as well joining us. So we're trying to make this a little bit more of a collaborated process, but it was a good meeting with the representative, and she brought us up to speed on the 3 bills that she has initiated, and so we're going to be working with her to try and get those across the finish line, and then also maybe introduce some other ideas that we've got. So anyway, it was a good meeting, but that was probably the high point of the week.
Great. Good job. And I'm thinking a little bit long term, but should such a program come about, we have in Washington County a large portion of our county is in rural lands with about 30,000 plus residents. Is there a scheme that programs, grant and loan programs might offer to help counties figure out where within a large area to target some implementation first?
Yeah, actually, there's the state of Washington is way ahead of us on this. You can go on their website. Ariane from Colpac sent me the link to that. They've got their entire state, and their state is not too different from ours. They got a lot of rural east of the mountains, and they've already done all of that. So we're going to try and follow along with that. The biggest issue that we have is the state formed a broadband advisory committee but didn't fund it, so it's just sitting there. So I think the governor's trying to find some money, I think, to fund that commission, and then we can begin to move ahead with studies and being able to identify all those folks.
Right. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can leverage from there. That's great.
No, there's some good ideas out there.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Commissioner Rogers.
Sure. I don't know whether to say I'm sorry to Jerry or not. If that's the highlight of your week, as you explained, good work anyway. Last night was the ACT meeting. Just a host of topics, everything from Rhodes Quarter updates to 205 updates to what they're doing around the state on various acts. As you probably know, as chair, I've been to various meetings with other ACT chairs throughout the state over the last couple of years. And I think Pam was there as well, representing the business sector. And I think it was a lengthy but good meeting. Tomorrow we have our noon meeting, again, Pam representing WEA and myself with the workforce folks. So that'll be an interesting meeting as well. I'm introducing it's more for you, Pam. Anyway, Gigi has never met Andrew McGough. And so we're supposed to have a meeting to introduce him. It's hard to believe him being around all of his activities. He's never had a chance to say hello, but we're doing that next Monday is WCCC. And I've got 2 or 3 phone calls I need to return for constituents who either don't want to be in the urban growth boundary or have other concerns. So just like everyone else. So that's it.
Great. Commissioner Fye, anything you might like to share with us? Welcome to February. You have a whole month under your belt now.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Madam Chair. It's a new month, yes. And I do feel like I'm officially over the hump of being a new board member. Thank you so much, my fellow commissioners and Madam Chair, for all your support and guidance for my first month. You all have my permission to continue to be nice to me. So
I love it.
Feel free. I want to say today is the second day of Black History Month, and I want to wish you all and everyone in our county happy Black History Month. I am very honored to be the first Black board member. And for this Black History Month, I celebrate, rejoice, and thank every African-American person, past and present, for paving the way for hope and freedom. The mere fact that I am elected to the board of Washington County Commissioner is the ultimate truth that change is possible, and a really great example of what unification, especially unifying people, looks like to demand representation. And in terms of my update, I'll be brief and say I am continuing my department level briefings with staff and really being a sponge and have been nerding out with annexation and really learning all I can about annexation and in relevance to in my district. And Aaron Doyle has been really a great help and my new best friend in that topic.
That's great. That's great. Well, that just leaves me for the last of the five. I want to compliment staff, Ms. Angie, to pass on. I had a very busy month of January with briefings on a whole variety of topics. And they were all really useful. In a way, I think what happened in my own mind is with the pandemic of last year, our first 4 or 5 months of the pandemic, that was so all consuming that we chose to delay a bunch of things. And then it took us a while to get back to sort of usual business. And with the coming of the new year, it was really time to be back at operational speed. Yet my brain had forgotten a bunch of things. So, the staff through these briefings has really exercised my thinking muscles, and they've been very graceful as I have made mistakes and forgotten information. And I'm just once again reminded about how we have a great organization of people that are not only empowered to do their jobs on behalf of the public, but really do help us as commission members better understand the scope of programs and try to lay out options for our policy and investment decision making. So I appreciate that. Meeting wise, the state, the governor's office, and OHA, as we've all seen in our emails, ensured that there were more vaccines available for the Tri-County area, and that's been useful to enable the population of our region to be more successful in the phase 1A vaccination completion. And now the educators, group 1, are going through. So the state has taken a look at how these first 6 weeks or so of vaccinations have gone. And the CDC, as we, or at least I had heard earlier in January, has a system in place by which states every week can request a certain number of vaccinations, and then CDC comes back and tells the state, this is how many you're going to get. And then within the next 3 days or so, those are the vaccinations that are then received through directly from the manufacturers to the shot administrators. So that system now has been operational for about 3+ weeks. We continue to have less supply than we have demand. So that is trying on our nerves. But who knows? We have hope for further good news with the Johnson & Johnson vaccination, and who knows if AstraZeneca may have a supply for us. The point that I'm trying to get at is that the state has looked at how things have gone through the administration of the vaccination in different demographics in our state, and is now working on a system following CDC guidance to look at allocations per county, but also factor in societal variability and different social determinants. So they're evaluating a system by which there's a base set of vaccinations, and then they'll use this social variability index, which the CDC defines. So for counties like ours that have more diversity of racial and ethnic diversity, as well as age diversity than other counties, we might get more vaccination doses than we would get otherwise. So our experts in public health are working with OHA and the other state agencies on looking at this evaluation technique. So if you have any further questions about that, it's not final at all, but please do connect with Marnie on that. Some of the feedback from other counties, according to Leah Horner, is that folks really wanted to dig into what the index is all about. And from my standpoint, it's something that is standard from the CDC and follows a best practice. So as much as that I am a geek and want to know how things work, I trust in that system. So I don't feel the need to geek out in terms of understanding how that index is put together. But if you do have questions, do feel free to connect with Marnie on that. So just wanted to follow up on that. Then, as you know, I will be away next week on vacation. I will be participating in our meetings all day next Tuesday, but I'll be counting on our vice chair, Commissioner Treese, to run those meetings. And since I'm not sure what the Wi-Fi performance will be like, I've connected with Kevin, so I will Zoom in for the slides, and hopefully there will be enough bandwidth so you can see my face. And then I'll also connect in via my telephone, so the audio stream is separate, so that hopefully I don't drive you all crazy with bad connectivity there. So we'll see how it goes, won't we? So that's it from me. Before we go to leadership communication, so as to not forget, when we go through items 2, 3, and 4 on the agenda, staff has made some adjustments to their presentations. So the presentations that we see on screen may be different than what we have in the current published packet. They will be updating that, but just a heads up on that. So I'll turn it over to, go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
Just, excuse me, and to answer your question about the amount of dollars, to underscore your comments about the staff, I sent a text message off to Jenny Proctor, and she immediately got back to me. We don't get our final numbers from HUD until the end of February, but what we use is our previous projections. And for CDBG, it's about 2.2 million, and for home, it's about 1.7 million. So
yeah, so appreciable dollars.
Yes.
Yeah, that go into effect in our communities and leverage other funds.
Absolutely. So thank you.
You bet. Ms. Angie.
So good morning, everyone. So speaking of Wi-Fi, I am in the office today because I have 2 children, virtual schooling, and my husband at home working. And needless to say, my Wi-Fi doesn't hold out the entire day. So I made an appearance at the office. So it's nice that I have this availability. So from a workforce case count, our numbers went down again this week, which is a great sign. We have 3 positive cases and 2 close contact quarantines. The numbers, our cases going down actually mirrors what we're seeing in Washington County as well. Fingers crossed, we remain hopeful that we will transition from extreme risk to high risk. What this will mean for operations, though, is we will still continue to encourage teleworking for employees, services by appointments, virtual services, and we will open in-person services. However, once again, encouraging community to still use other means so that our case counts continue to decline. As far as meetings, we will be discouraging any meetings over 6 people. Within the high risk category, it does indicate that gatherings should be limited to 6 or under. So this also impacts how we will be delivering services, and once again, still encouraging the virtual in appointment only. However, I would say this is good news, and I think it we feel hopeful as an organization as well. I also want, yes, Chair.
I forgot to mention this earlier. So Washington County, this being what the state calls a warning week, I refer to it as a signal week. Our case count is such that the county might be able to move from extreme to high risk, as Ms. Angie mentioned. Clackamas County and Multnomah County are very close. They were within 5 cases of reaching that metric this week. So I remain hopeful that with some state discretion, that all 3 counties might be able to move next week to high risk, because that would allow more business flexibility. And since our communities are so interconnected, we saw some difficulties last summer where our county and Clackamas County reopened before Multnomah County, and it caused some problems. So stay tuned. We're making progress. Everyone keep wearing your masks, washing your hands, and practicing physical distancing. It makes a difference. Thank you.
So staff continue to close out our 2020 CRF funds of $104 million. Once again, as a reminder, we successfully spent those dollars in support of our community by the end of the calendar year. So huge kudos to staff and the board support with this work. Some of you have inquired, when do we get a report out of those dollars? Jack and team are feverishly working on that, and that is scheduled in March to report out to the board final dollar allocations as well as outcome measures. Chair, I just, and Commissioner Treese, I want to share appreciation for your words of staff and the quality of briefings and responsiveness. I completely agree. We are a learning organization, so we do appreciate feedback and how we can best serve your information needs as well as that of the community. So we continue to learn and grow together. And that concludes my report.
I'll jump in if you don't mind. You're on mute, Madam Chair.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Good morning. Yes, we continue to receive the lawsuits. We got another one yesterday, and we'll give you a report on that by the end of the week. And although we had, Kim got 2 cases dismissed last week, and we are in the process of recruiting for Chris's replacement, and so we're hopefully going to get some help soon. I will not be at your Thursday meeting. I'll be out of town, but Paul Hathaway will be sitting in my place. So that's it. Thank you.
Ms. Taniguchi Dennis, Clean Water Services.
Thank you, Chair Harrington, and good morning, board. I have some good news to report. Clean Water Services is at full employment capacity. We had 1 case the team was managing, but the team member tested negative. So we're very glad and thankful for that. So they continue to do their practices, and our operations are continuing well. We're glad the rain stopped, and so the team can have a breather. But happy Groundhog's Day. It sounds like 6 more weeks of winter, but we're ready and thriving. Thanks.
Onward, ho, we go. At least we're getting a little bit more daylight with each and every day, right? Great. Well, formal agenda check-in. Let's see. We have the proclamation as mentioned. We do have a youth member who will be reading today's proclamation. Other than that, I just wanted to highlight on the consent agenda, on the minutes for January 19th, 2021, I think we might have a Scribner's error. On page 3 under item A1, presentations, the 5th item was on the, I believe it was the COVID presentation. I mentioned that Columbia County is part of our health region. The word health is missing. That's all. That's why I mentioned it as a Scribner's error. And other than that, there are no item updates. I usually announce those here first. Are there any board questions on today's meeting agenda? No? Okay, well, then we can move on. Terrific. Then we're just a few minutes ahead of schedule, but Ms. Angie, are we ready for topic 2, bicycle facility selection for Thompson Road, Kenny Saltzman project?
Yes, I see Stephen Roberts is joining us.
Morning.
Hi.
Okay, and I think we have Joe. Okay, I think we're ready.
And who is Rocky Brown?
So Rocky is actually the project manager for this project that we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, cool. I've not had the opportunity to meet Mr. Brown.
All right. Well, now's your chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Chair, Commissioners.
Rocky, you've been with the county 20 years, I want to guess.
29 years this
20.
year.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
This morning. So this morning we're here to run through a presentation. The board back in 2017 adopted a resolution that called for board input on the selection of doing county-funded capital projects. And that resolution, the board stated a preference. Oh, it's Chair.
Is it just me or is Stephen's audio coming in and out?
All right, thank you. Let me check my settings here. Is that better? Okay, thank you. So I'll start over just to make sure. Got that. Still not? Let's try this. Is that better?
It seems like if you face your computer, it comes across, but the minute you deflect in any way, you know, shift your weight, it's like the echo cancellation is kicking in or something and it fades out.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Stay more or less stationary. All right. Thank you. Okay. So just a quick recap what I said earlier. So in 2017, the board adopted resolution 17-2. And in the resolution, the board stated its preference to implement what we call separated or protected bike facilities when we're doing county funded capital projects. But the policy also intentionally left flexibility because we knew that there are always unique circumstances on each project that should be taken into consideration as well. And I meant to mention too, I also, you mentioned we had a little bit of an addition to our presentation. So I actually have a separate supplemental 3-slide presentation. And that was added primarily in response to a late breaking constituent suggestion about this project. So I think if I can run through this presentation, and then we might toggle over to the other and just discuss that constituent suggestion at the end. So what we're planning to do is just provide some background context about the project, the location, and present a couple of bicycle facility alternatives, and then open it up for some discussion. Next slide, please. So the project we're discussing today is Thompson Road, and this has been a long planned realignment of Thompson Road. So if you see there's a blue line that's labeled Thompson Road there, that's the current alignment. And then the red outline shows the proposed realignment. And I'll talk a little bit more. This is a particularly unique circumstance. So next slide, please. The context, land use context, the area is primarily single family residential. You'll see that there is a red property that is a small commercial center. And for location, I neglected to mention, we're sort of in the far northeast portion of the county. So we're up in District 2, very near the Multnomah County boundary. And so there's the small commercial parcel at the northwest corner of Saltzman Road and Thompson Road. Finley Elementary School is at the northwest corner. And then at the southwest corner of the intersection, there's a undeveloped parcel that has been purchased by Tualatin Hills Park and Rec District. And we've been coordinating closely with the Park District on this project. Next slide. So the transportation's, oh, yes, Chair.
Just also for the context, I've looked at a satellite map. I think in the intention, as you and your group have worked in this area for a long time, am I correct in understanding that for Northwest Kenny Terrace, there are no driveways into that street, that it's essentially been designed as a no access parkway? Or how would you describe it accurately?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good description. And when we get a little bit further, we'll have some aerial photos, and then we'll talk about access points and intersections. Yeah, that's a great question. So in the transportation system plan, and I apologize, I didn't catch the acronym there on the slide, but in the transportation system plan, the realignment of Thompson Road, again outlined in red here, is designated as an arterial roadway. The existing alignment of Thompson Road, the blue line, is actually classified as a neighborhood route. And that is based on the assumption that in the future, as Thompson Road is realigned, it will function as more of a neighborhood route than as its current function as an arterial. Next slide, please. Also in the transportation system plan, we have bikeway designations, and this segment of Thompson Road is designated as what's called a major street bikeway. And on a major street bikeway, the highlighted text there indicates that a 6-foot bike lane or buffered bike lane is generally considered sufficient to accommodate cyclists on these types of facilities. And the other facility type is what's called an enhanced major street bikeway. And that typically would call for, at a minimum, a buffered bike lane, and then also consideration of some sort of separated or protected facility. Next slide, please. So just traffic data, again, for some background context. On Thompson Road, existing traffic volumes are about 7,300 cars per day. That's pretty low for an arterial roadway. But you can see if you look ahead on Thompson Road in 2040, we're projecting about 12,500 vehicles. So that's still a little bit on the lower end for an arterial roadway, but definitely an increase in traffic projected there. Next slide, please. So as we go through this, we're going to look at two different segments of the roadway. And the reason for that, as I mentioned, this is a somewhat unique circumstance. So Chair, as you mentioned earlier, there's an existing portion of this realigned roadway that was constructed through the middle of a residential subdivision there that's currently referred to as Kenny Terrace. And so segment one, when we talk about segment one, we're primarily talking about that existing portion the roadway that's been constructed. And then when we talk about segment 2, that's really the portion that goes through to the east through the Tualatin Hills Park and Rec property. And I would note too, I mentioned earlier, we've been coordinating very closely with Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District, and our operating agreement with the Park District at this time is that they will dedicate the right of way for the realigned roadway, and then the county will build the roadway through the park site. And that helps to alleviate the Park District's future burden for any roadway improvements in that segment there too. So a win-win for both, it looks like. Next slide, please. So the existing conditions, and apologize, this map's oriented a little bit differently to try to fit it on the slide here. So north is sort of at a 45-degree angle. But you can see the existing portion of what's called Kinney Terrace now, which will be the new Thompson Road alignment. The red line that you see on this drawing is the proposed realignment center line. So we're going to be smoothing out the curve that's on the left side of your slide, so at sort of the southwest, and then through the Park District property there on the right-hand side of the slide. And the existing portion along Kinney Terrace was developed as a 3-lane arterial with what we, at the time, back in 2001, was our standard cross-section. So an unbuffered on-street bike lane and then 3 vehicle lanes. And segment 2 obviously is the sort of undeveloped property. So it's just a slightly sloping site there. Next slide, please. So a few photos. This is looking down Kinney Terrace, and this is sort of near the west end of the existing completed roadway, and looking back toward the east. And so you can see there are a number of existing mature street trees and existing landscaping that's maintained by the homeowners association of the adjacent residential neighborhood there, and currently has 5-foot sidewalks on both sides of the roadway, and as I mentioned earlier, just the standard single stripe bike lane. Next slide. So this is taken at the very west end of the project and actually looking west along the existing Thompson Road. So this is going to be the portion of the project where we're tapering back from 3 lanes back to the existing 2-lane segment. I would note on this slide that there's a sidewalk on the right-hand side or the north side of Thompson Road that was recently constructed as part of an urban road maintenance district sidewalk project. And so we'll be connecting up to that existing sidewalk, and that sidewalk then continues further down to the next residential subdivision to the west. Next slide. And this photo is taken from the east end of Kinney Terrace, where the road currently ends. So behind the white barricade and the green fencing is the Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation property. Next slide. And this slide is actually taken at the intersection of Thompson Road with Saltzman Road. So the actual location of the intersection will remain the same. And again, you can see as we transition across Saltzman Road, we also have three vehicle lanes and standard on-street bike lanes at this location too. Next slide. So I think, Chair, this gets back to your earlier question about access points. And so you're right, Kinney Terrace was designed, as you saw on the slides, with no driveway connections. It was always intended to be an arterial roadway, and so the access spacing was based on our requirements for an arterial roadway. So one of the things we look at as a part of our evaluation is where you have conflict points, vehicular access across the bike lanes potentially. So we'll have the Thompson Road, what I'll call Old Thompson Road, will curve and intersect with Kinney Terrace down at this location. And then there's a local street that feeds into the 2 neighborhoods called Dalton Ranch, and that intersection is here near the middle. And then down at the far east end, we have the signalized intersection that you saw earlier at Saltzman Road and Thompson Road. And I would note here at this time, we're not anticipating that what I'll call Old Thompson would reconnect back into the new realigned roadway. And that's a function of proximity to the existing signalized intersection. And so that's our proposal at this time there with that, in regard to that. Next slide. So I wanted to mention our coordination and public involvement that we've done so far on the project. So we've been closely coordinating with Beaverton School District and Tualatin Hills Park and Rec District. We held a community participation organization, CPO7 presentation just over a year ago. We held an online open house in May of 2020. And then you can see briefly the summary of the comments. There were some concerns with obviously the increase in traffic on Kinney Terrace, which is currently just a dead end road that the only way to get to it is through those existing residential neighborhoods. And concerns with potential speed there, concerns with some cut through traffic in the adjacent neighborhood. And then wanting to ensure that we have safe pedestrian access to the school. And then we're planning to do an additional open house in April of this year too. Next slide. So we wanted to show you two different alternatives today. The first alternative, and this is our staff recommendation, you can see highlighted here, would be to essentially retain the existing roadway, Kinney Terrace, segment 1. And what we would do is actually reduce the width of the vehicle lanes and use that additional space that we gain by narrowing the vehicle lanes to create a buffered bike lane. And that would be a 2-foot painted buffer. And that's sort of become our de facto standard on most of our road projects now as our minimum treatment. And then for segment 2, the portion that would go through the Tualatin Hills Park and Recreation District, essentially the same cross-section proposed there, although where we would be constructing new sidewalks, we would build those to 6 feet, which is our current standard practice. The existing sidewalks on Kinney Terrace are 5 feet, which was the standard when that portion was built. Next slide, please. The second alternative that we looked at retains the on-street buffered bike lanes, but included a wider multi-use path. So essentially a 10-foot combination sidewalk and potential path. So if you had younger users or less confident cyclists, they would have the opportunity to potentially ride on the multi-use path, and it still accommodates pedestrians. Next slide, please. So just a couple of notes on those two alternatives. So the first alternative, which is again our recommendation, it maintains the existing sidewalk and landscaping, so helps to minimize cost and impacts on the existing landscaping through that existing segment. And the Adjacent Homeowners Association preferred this option because it would retain the existing landscaping that is in place along Kinney Terrace. The multi-use path with the buffered on-street bike lanes, that obviously provided the wider sidewalk on both sides, but does require removal of some of the existing landscaping along the road there. Next slide. So this is a quick evaluation. There's no real science to these, but we try to assess how the two alternatives may compare in terms of relative protection for a cyclist, maintenance costs, landscaping impacts, continuity with other adjacent bike facilities, or similarity rather, and then we provide cost information. And I would note here that the $6 million was the original cost estimate that was assumed, and this is a project that's being funded through the MSTIP bonding cost sharing program. So $4 million of the project costs would come from that bonding cost sharing program, and then we would supplement that with $2 million of TDT funds. The multi-use path, the cost increases to about $6.5 million. Next slide. So again, this just a visual summary of our recommendations. So again, the on-street bike lanes, retaining existing sidewalks and landscaping in the existing developed portion in Kinney Terrace, and then essentially extending that design through the park side as well. And I neglected to mention a little bit earlier, or I did mention actually, that we had a couple of supplemental slides. So if I could ask Kevin or Michael to switch over, we had just a few additional slides, and these were in response to a constituent suggestion that we received on Sunday evening, but wanted to, the constituent asked that we share that with you, and we wanted to do that. And then I also realized as I was looking through this yesterday, we also didn't include images of some of these different types of cycle facilities. And so I just wanted to include a couple of images here when we talk about a protected or separated facility, just so you have a visual. So this is something that we would consider sort of a protected cycle track. It's essentially a buffered bike lane, but also has these flexible bollards. The center photo is what's called a raised cycle track. This is an example in the city of Hillsborough. And it's a little bit hard to make out, but there's a curb between the bike facility and the roadway. And then the third slide on the right is just a multi-use off-street path. So similar to what we had suggested for our option alternative 2. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we had a constituent suggestion and we wanted to share that with the board as well. And the proposal, and I'll have there's images on the next slide that will explain this, but it would retain the on-street buffered bike lanes as consistent with the staff recommendation and the other alternative that we looked at. But it would eliminate the planter strip between the curb and the sidewalk and essentially reclaim that 4 feet to create a wider sidewalk, so a total 9-foot wide sidewalk. And the potential benefits, the constituent listed a number of benefits, but I tried to summarize them fairly succinctly that would accommodate cyclists, whether they wanted to ride on street or potentially on the sidewalk, depending on their comfort level or preference. Expressing that the elimination of the planter strip could be beneficial in terms of both maintenance and safety. Just there's less stuff to have to maintain. Trees in the planter strip could be a head clearance problem on the sidewalk or the bike lane, and lower growing vegetation could also potentially be a tripping hazard if it were allowed to grow out into the bike lane or sidewalk. Potential drawbacks of the alignment, it would require the removal of somewhere between 55 and 60 of the existing street trees that we saw in the photo earlier. And then it adds an additional, this may be a little bit high, but we're anticipating it could be somewhere between $150,000 to $250,000 to remove the existing trees, reconstruct the sidewalk at its increased width, and then relocate existing street lighting from the planter strip back behind the sidewalk. Next slide. And the constituent did this. I was kind of impressed, actually. It's a pretty good sketch. So just to illustrate, so where you see the green over the existing sidewalk and planter strip, the idea would be to create a continuous wide sidewalk there, eliminate the trees and the planter strip, and then the green bar underneath the bike lane and this proposed wider sidewalk sort of illustrates an active transportation zone. And then you can see the street lighting then would be relocated back behind the wider sidewalk. And I neglected to mention another potential advantage the constituent pointed out was that having the street lighting behind the sidewalk could actually help better illuminate the sidewalk itself too. So that's it for the supplemental presentation, and we're happy to take any questions that you may have or provide additional info.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, I have 2 questions. Could you remind me what the length of this Kenny Terrace is, the cut through? What are we talking about in terms of distance between Thompson Road and Thompson Road?
That is a great question. I'll look to, I don't know if Rocky or Joe might have that. I'm going to just take a quick measurement on our mapping here.
It's 4,000 feet, Stephen.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So, and then the other question is, what is the street treatment before this proposal on Thompson Road and after the proposal on, at each end, the east and the west end of what's now referred to as Kenny Terrace?
So on the west end, there are no bike lanes currently, and the sidewalk on only the north side of the road. And on the east end, as you cross Saltzman Road, Thompson Road, there does have 3 vehicle lanes plus the 2 standard on-street bike lanes. So very similar to what's currently constructed on Kenny Terrace.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Willie?
Yeah, Stephen, so the constituent suggestion, I guess, are you now recommending those modifications to the scenario 1 and 2 that you presented earlier? Is that what you're doing?
No, we're still suggesting the staff recommendation, the first alternative. But again, wanted to make sure that we presented the constituents' suggestion to the board as an additional alternative.
Oh, okay. Because I was just thinking that then you're going to present this back around to the public, the open house that you're going to have in April, I think it was. So you're going to include this diagram at that open house?
Well, I think our hope would be to get some board direction today on which facility we would implement, and then we would essentially be communicating that back to the community at the open house.
So I think that's a little bit of a point of confusion. You've already had the project open house on alternatives, right? And so this next open house is really the open house to say, this is what we're planning to construct. Yeah,
Correct.
so it's important for us to know what stage these open houses are. So thank you for clarifying that. Good question, Commissioner Willie. So I know I have a couple of questions, if I might.
Yes.
I do too.
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Rogers.
Stephen, this is for everybody. One point and then one question. I support your position. I appreciate this is an input, but we have a lot of costs coming up on this bonding project, meaning all of them. And so this doesn't inhibit right away at some point in time. It just delays maybe some action that somebody wants today. So I fully support your position. And the community, and it's not my district, but from what I'm reading, they don't want us to rip all those trees out and change the character. Not today. We can always do that in the future. So I'm more in favor of exactly what you're proposing. And my little tiny question, and it may have a de minimis value, but you have a fragment that's going to be created when you have the abandonment of the certain right-of-way connections or the realignment of the road. I don't know how big that is. Does it have any value to it? Do you know what I'm talking about, Thompson, where it comes, it's going to be realigned? I can't tell by the map how big a fragment that is.
They'll be quite small. I don't think there's any real like development potential or use potential for those. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great question. Yeah.
So I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
Could you bring the slide up that shows the, I didn't note the slide number, but it had the one with the circles of the intersections for the whole project extent?
Yeah, should be slide 13 in the larger presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So at the bottom section here with existing Thompson Road, the south end of Kenny Terrace, yes. Was there any consideration for a rotary versus a signalized intersection?
No, we didn't look at a roundabout, and honestly, I think what we're proposing here will be a stop control for the older Thompson Road alignment, and then the new Thompson alignment will be a
straight through.
unsigned. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Misunderstanding on my part. Okay, great. Just a couple of points. All of these alternatives fit within the 45-foot existing and proposed right-of-way.
That's correct.
So in some way, given that this is a short distance parkway, and I understand that you're following your current urban road maintenance standards, the design standards. When you have such limited access, I think it's somewhat, there's a trade-off between having a center turn lane when you have essentially no turns. And the costs of building that, not only building that, but more importantly, the stormwater considerations that come with that. And I think we are entering an era, or we're actually in an era due to climate change, where we need to be far more sensitive to how we're going about our built infrastructure. And it's one thing to continue to have that right of way, but we have all of that pavement that is just creating more surface water. And, you know, an alternative would have been, and I realize we're talking about 20 years of history now, but the alternative would have been to have just the 2 lanes, and then at the intersections, build out the turn lane that is needed and appropriate, and then go back down to, after you continue north, after that other turn lane, to go back down to the 2 center lanes in order to cut down the amount of pervious pavement. And I think as your team goes through the new road design standards, we really need to take a hard look at that because of the societal cost shifting of then I actually don't agree with the staff recommendation, and here's why. There are very few instances where we have a confluence of a school, Finley Elementary School, a park, and a neighborhood center. Okay, it's the penultimate confluence of that with regard to a multi-use path opportunity. Each of your alternatives does work within the 45-foot segment. And over my years of living in this region, I have really spent a lot of time observing human behavior, and the number of community members who are walking and families bicycling together, with everything from little kids with their push bikes with no pedals, all the way through new adult riders on bicycles being far more comfortable with those multi-use paths. So I actually think it's a smart move for us to go with the I'll call it the alternative to and or this other proposal. But I think we really should be building out this multi-use path. In not building out the multi-use path, in only having a 6-foot, what we're doing is it's societal cost shifting, but in a non-calculated way. Think about how many community members we are saying, sorry, but your access is not important to us or not being monetized. We're talking about the scope of influence in children's lives over, kids only get to be kids for 20 years, or even if you think about it for just 10 years, over the number of generations. I think it's a very good investment to better enable not only the neighborhoods around on each side of Kinney Terrace, but there are also neighborhoods out to the southwest and the west from here, that we would be far better off as an overall community to enable that experience and opportunity. Okay, so you look at the cost chart. Yes, there are additional costs, but monetize that out over the just one childhood, right? 20 years, or cut that in half, 10 years. And it makes a difference. I beg to differ with Commissioner Rogers. we will never go back and retrofit, or it's not going to happen in the next 40 years because we still have such a demand for building out our transportation system. So better to take those current costs. I appreciate that the HOA would prefer not to have the current landscaping impacted. But come on, folks, this is the Northwest. This is not like living in the Northeast. Things grow quickly here. So I'm not worried about that. And folks moved into this neighborhood knowing that Kenny Terrace was built as a parkway access way, even though it wasn't connected yet. Doesn't matter about signage. People have to do their homework, not just on the individual house that they're looking at, but the overall community context. So I think for the benefit of the larger community over the decades ahead, we are far better off to go with the wider multi-use path. And I could say that is alternative 2, but I also want to recognize that what the constituent has raised with the trees is a bit of a problem, as well as with debris. So I want to leave that to staff's further discretion to look at it's from a human standpoint, it's preferable to have, that landscaping does have some nice context to it, particularly when we're talking about using it in rainy weather and so forth. But we have such a propensity here to plant deciduous trees that, doesn't have that much offset. Yes and no. I mean, curb type isn't exactly user friendly, but once again, we have to balance pervious versus non-pervious maintenance costs and so forth. So what it all boils down to, I think we're far better off as a community to have the 10-foot multi-use path. And I leave it up to staff as to whether or not we implement that as alternative 2, or try and leave some flexibility, particularly with regard to cost of implementation, with what the constituent has brought forward. I'd like to make sure staff has the opportunity to digest that. So those are my thoughts. Oh, the last one was, I appreciated how you had the slide on the major street bikeway and mentioned the enhanced major street bikeway path design as well, because I know that you and your staff participated in the development of the regional active transportation plan and the Washington County specific one, because that leveraged best known practices throughout the country, and including the effectiveness of multi-use path, studies to show that. Because prior to your displaying that, I wondered if your staff, like Shelley O'Lear and others, had the benefit of doing a literature search on the effectiveness of multi-use path. So you're reminding me of the major street bikeways, and that whole effort caused me to realize, okay, right, their reminder to self that the Washington County staff is very well connected with the other planning expertise throughout the region and looking at those best known practices. So thank you very much.
Thank
So
you.
I'm interested to hear my colleagues' feedback on what I was discussing with regard to alternative 2. Commissioner Treese?
Thank you, Chair. And I really appreciate your thoughts on this. You brought to the forefront ideas that I hadn't really thought of. So thank you for that. And I have a couple questions. Stephen, do you know what the plans are for the THPRD park and kind of the time frame and what they envision will be the components of that park? And the reason I'm asking is that when you're looking at 3/4 of a mile parkway with that park at the end, if I think the characteristics of the park combine with the idea of a parkway there that the chair was just talking about. So I'm just curious what their plans are. Can you help me with that?
I can, and Kevin, Janine Rustad from THPRD may actually be listening in too, if we wanted to elevate her, but we spoke again last week, just checking in before the presentation. And my understanding is they have not done a plan for the park at this point. And so it may be several years yet before they actually undertake the planning work on that particular site.
So when they do that, I mean, like the chair said, you've got Findlay Elementary right there. I mean, the chances of it not being a kid-friendly park are not very good, right? I mean, I wouldn't expect that the community would want that. So, that's, and, I am leaning toward the chair's concept because there are very few places where we have, and looking at the pictures, where it is, there isn't the interference of driveways, it's a throughway, and that there aren't very many opportunities to build a little corridor where people can learn to ride their bikes, or where young people feel safe in a multi-use path. So, originally I was leaning toward the staff recommendations, but I want to hear what other commissioners have to say, with full respect to what Roy's saying about, the fact that we have limited dollars. That's true, but we also have limited opportunities like this.
And Commissioner Treese, I would add, I used a proxy for myself. I've already identified the neighborhood center, the school, and then with regard to the park, while I was a Metro counselor, there was a Safe Routes to School project for Findlay, and to try and reduce the vehicular traffic, and it was very successful. And so I used that in my own thinking as a bit for a proxy for the idea of, if you build it, they will come. And to better appreciate what the draw might be for building out that wider multi-use path.
Well, and I'm also looking at the density of that neighborhood, and the fact that there are a lot of homes in a relatively close proximity, and it's the anticipation of a high use would be great.
Yeah, and Thompson Heights to the north is a large neighborhood as well.
Right, I'm aware of that. So I'd say that I am leaning toward alternative 2, with the staff taking a look at the constituents' input there. I think it's a unique situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, Stephen, to answer your question, we do not have anyone from THPRD online.
Okay, thank you.
I don't need any more. I don't personally need any more information from them. I was just asking if there was a plan in place, and it doesn't appear so at this point in time.
Yeah, so it might take some time, but they're usually pretty judicious at building out their parks. Any other commissioner comments?
Yeah, my final comment. I appreciate your comments. I don't agree. I'd certainly like to know what we're doing in overcommitment of that bonding, and there's a reason people come to Washington County. I've lived here all my life, and I was in Multnomah County, and we enjoy some of the aspects of having those trees and the division. And I guess Commissioner Treese will have to answer as well as the chair in regard to tearing that up. I don't, but I certainly can understand that the community is going to be very, very disappointed in action such as that. And in all due respect for those of us who have enjoyed Multnomah County growing up, we were lucky to walk on 3-foot paths, alone these wide areas, and we didn't have the bike paths that we have today. So small investment, but again, I understand your arguments. Reasonable people have different conclusions. So I'll stop, and you all get to answer for that.
Commissioner Fye, do you have any comments, or Commissioner Willie? Because we need to come to a conclusion here on a board direction so staff can move forward.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was waiting for Commissioner Fye. I guess I'm tending to agree with staff on this, on alternative 1, 6-foot sidewalks and all of those things. I think that's a very nice street design, and we can preserve the existing landscaping, which is already getting more mature. So I would tend to agree with the staff recommendation.
So in the notes that I have for Kenny Terrace segment 1, it would be a 5-foot sidewalk, not a 6-foot sidewalk.
That's correct. Yeah, the existing sidewalk is 5 feet. In the new section through the park, that would expand to 6 feet was our proposal.
So, excuse me, just clarification there. Does that mean that the only part of that 3/4 mile piece that would be 6 feet is through the park? The rest of it would be 5 feet?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Stephen, great presentation. I think for me, I learned how to bike at a later age. Actually, I was 30 when I learned how to bike, and really appreciated multi-use opportunities. Didn't feel safe to ride where option 1 or alternative 1 is suggesting. So I think making space for folks who might be learning, and then to add to that, I do have small children, and definitely could see myself utilizing alternative 2 with my kids. And there are a lot of moms and families, and since there's a school, who wouldn't normally, who might not feel safe and comfortable letting their kids ride, and then for them to walk, because you want to be in charge of their speed they're going, to keep an eye on them. And so I really do also, along with Commissioner Treese, do lean alternative 2, because I could see a lot of people utilizing that space. And I think with innovation and where the world is heading, multi-use, it gives us an opportunity probably to save down the road more money than really coming together later on and then saying, why are we leaving this extra space that we're not utilizing? So whether that is to widen the road or whatever. So I'm just thinking that it might be worth our money to invest early on, and then to get our money later on too. So I like alternative 2, and I'm not sure I completely understand the constituent recommendation versus the alternative 2 in regards to the tree moving. So I think there's that one tree where it's at, it looks fine to me, because in alternative 2, you remove one of the tree in the back end, right? And then the staff or the constituent is suggesting removing the other tree, right? So I think for me, in design wise, alternative 2 is fine. I'm not sure. You probably need to look at the constituent too in fine details and see the recommendation, how they different. But I'm fine with that tree where it's at in alternative 2. But then again, I'm not in that district and I don't live there. So I think the constituent voice is far more important than, but I do know there are a lot of people, in terms of perspective taking, that would really utilize alternative 2 if we create that. And I do agree with the chair said, if you build it, people will come. And I think we will have so many people that we could mobilize to be active and utilize their bikes and walk safely. So that's my comment.
I have one more comment in regard to what Commissioner Rogers said about the removal of trees. I think it's an important communication piece that needs to happen if we do go with an alternative that removes trees, telling the story as to why, what's coming as the on the back end of that. And so I understand what Roy's saying, and I understand the implication that as commissioner in that district, as well as the chair for all districts, that you have to take some of that heat. But I think part of the approach is to make sure that the community understands what the thought process is and why it's being built in this way and what the future holds in relationship to the connectivity of the parkway, the park, and the school.
Thank you, Commissioner Treese. I appreciated hearing the comments about alternative 2 versus what the constituent was contributing. I haven't had the opportunity to analyze how the constituents' technique would be applied for the full extent of the segment. And, so we have some problem trees here and there. It's not usually a problem for me. I usually have to tell my much taller husband to duck for those low-hanging branches. So I'm very comfortable with proceeding with alternative 2 that would support street tree usage in addition to the 10-foot multi-use path. But I want to make sure that staff has the opportunity to do that site analysis and identification. But if going full alternative 2 versus the constituent means that we can retain as many street trees as possible, I'm all for that. Absolutely. So it looks like we have. Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
I think I have one more comment, and I apologize, but I think it's very cool that we got this type of input from a well-informed constituent. So I want to say thank you, but I also, in my scheme of things, I want staff to make the decisions about the best application of those ideas. But Stephen, you might think about getting that person's resume for future job openings. So.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, so in the interest of time, it looks like if I could summarize so we can move on to the rest of the agenda, you have a majority of commissioners who are comfortable going with alternative 2. And so we'll go with that and move on.
Excellent.
Are there any other questions you have?
No, I did want to just make a comment. I think what we'll do is, obviously, we haven't really had a chance to think a lot about the constituent suggestion as well. But I think what we'll do is we understand the direction is multi-use path, and we'll do our own little evaluation to try to assess impacts on landscaping and how we can work to try to minimize that as much as possible.
Yeah, Yep, you're hearing support for as many street trees as we can.
Yep.
But, okay, great.
Okay.
All righty, terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So at this point, we sign off from the work session and we'll transition over to a different Zoom link for our business meeting that convenes at 10 o'clock. And then we will reconvene our work session at 1 p.m. All righty, we'll see you all a little later then.